Maybe it was your job, maybe it's a public speaking class you're taking, whatever the case, all of us have experienced stress at one point or another in our lives. I'm no stranger to it. I spent 8 years in the Army and I spent 18 years working for the state of Florida in the Department of Corrections. And along the way, I learned quite a few things about stress and about dealing with stress and how to negate its negative effects. Now, I'd like to talk to you about a few things tonight. And first, I'd like to define stress and tell you about the different types. Next, I want to identify the symptoms of stress and how they affect your body. And lastly, I want to talk to you about ways of dealing with that stress so you can negate the negative effects as well. Now, according to an article that I came across on APA.org, the American Psychological Association identifies 3 specific types of stress. The first one is acute stress. And when you think about acute stress, think about what happens when you're startled. Okay? And the effects of acute stress are very rarely long-lasting, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it today. But the second type of stress is called episodic acute stress. And it happens from repeated episodes of acute stress. And it's common amongst people who take on too much, or they worry too much, and it's characteristic of that guy who's always running, but he's always running behind. He's that guy that lives in a perpetual state of crisis. Everybody knows that guy, right? Okay. Now, chronic stress is the scariest type of stress, and it comes from that day after day sensation that we can't escape the negative reality that we're living in. Maybe it's a bad marriage, maybe it's a bad job, whatever the case is. But I liken it to the old wives' tale that if you take a frog and you put him in a pot of lukewarm water and you turn the temperature underneath of him up slowly enough, he won't hop out because he doesn't realize what's going on. And that's what's so scary about chronic stress. Now, stress has long and short-term effects on our bodies. Okay? Now, some of the short-term effects include increased heart rate, they include diminished hearing, tunnel vision, things like that. Going back to like when you saw Courage the Cowardly Dog up there when he's startled. And the long-term effects of stress, though, are much more dangerous. And according to an article that I came across on mayoclinic.org titled Stress Management, it was written in April of 2016, long-term exposure to stress can cause things like anxiety, depression, and even heart disease. And going back to the article I mentioned a few minutes ago from the APA, they come right out and say it. They say stress kills. It kills through violence, it kills through suicide, it kills through heart attack, and it kills through stroke. And even though stress has all those negative things attached to it, we don't have to fall victim to it. There's things we can do to combat stress and to combat those negative effects. So I did some searching and I came across an article called Chronic Stress and Memory. And it's written by a man named Jonathan Waganat, and it was featured on GoGaleGroup.com. It's written in 2017. And in this article, he mentions several things that we can do to negate stress or to negate the effects, including exercise, meditation, and controlling our breathing. Conscious breathing is what he calls it. Now, those are okay. There's nothing wrong with those. But I wanted something that was a little bit different. I wanted something a little less orthodox. So I searched around and I found an article that was written by Lauren Frost in 2015. And she says that we can reduce stress by chewing gum. She says that chewing gum actually lowers the levels of the stress hormone cortisol in our body and thus reduces stress. She also suggests phoning a friend. Because when we talk to our friends, we vent our frustrations. We talk about what's wrong, we talk about our problems, and then we're able to relieve that stress. And lastly, this is my favorite, kind of because of the slide too, but don't forget to laugh. If you find something to laugh at, you're doing yourself a favor, because laughing releases endorphins, and endorphins naturally relieve stress. Now tonight we've talked about the types of stress and how they affect our bodies, and we've also talked about what we can do to reduce the effects of that stress on our bodies. Now, I'm hopeful that you'll take some of these techniques and that you'll implement them in your own lives. And as I leave you tonight, I want you to remember one thing, and that is that even though stress can have tremendously negative effects on your bodies, you don't have to fall victim to it. Thank you.